trying to understand the definition of obsession. Normally, if you look at a dictionary, that idea of obsession is like, some sort of obstination, right? Somebody is obsessed about something. Is that I am somehow addicted to something, that I am so linked to something that I want some sort of possession. But for the Spiritism, there is a very clear definition. And the definition will come from mainly the Medium's book by Allan Kardec. Of all the difficulties presented in the practice of Spiritism, among the worst we must place the obsession, which is the domination that certain spirits may acquire over certain individuals. That is a definition given by Allan Kardec. Not only from the Medium's book, but also from a very important book called Genesis. Allan Kardec would say, obsession is the persistent action that an evil spirit exerts upon a particular individual. So here we understand that idea of obsession as the pertinence, as the persistent, as the obstinated action. So it is a very insistent action exerted from one spirit to the other. Now, just a few reflections right away from that definition that Allan Kardec gives us. We all remember that we are all spirits. If we are here, we may have wondered before, am I a spirit or not? And the Spiritism helps us to understand that we are all spirits. So then if we are saying that the obsession is an action exerted by one spirit to another, so then number one, we understand that all of us have the potential not only to suffer an obsession, but also to cause it. And I think for me, it was one of the greatest lessons studying for this lecture. An obsessor is not necessarily different from any one of us. The difference maybe is because in some ways we are trying to combat certain of those negative influences that we potentially can exert upon others. So we think about it. We all hurt people. But we think about it. But we feel bad about it. So the obsession is a relationship between spirits that is harmful, that causes something negative in others. And of course that in the Spirit's book, question 559, Allan Kardec asks the spirits, do spirits have any influence on our thoughts and actions? And the answer is very clear. Their influence on you in this regard is greater than you suppose. For very frequently, it is them who guide you. The influence that one spirit has on others is part of our spiritual nature. Therefore, the ability of one spirit to influence another, it is of our nature. What matters then is the quality of that influence, is the quality of that relationship. It is the quality of how we are going to influence others. Now, Allan Kardec, in the book of Genesis, would say that usually what happens is the influence from one spirit to another will involve usually a little evolved spirit. A spirit that still doesn't understand the importance of the quality of the thoughts. It is a spirit that still didn't get in touch with that process of evolution, the importance and the benefit of growing spiritually, of acquiring qualities that will make them better. Either they don't know, or for whatever reason, that understanding is not enough for them to change their ways. However, Allan Kardec is very clear as well in saying that if there is an influence of an imperfect, negative, little evolved spirit in another, the main reason why this exists, it is not because of this first spirit has power over the one that he is, let's say, influencing, but it is because they are able to connect with us by identifying themselves with something in us. No relationship among the spirits will happen without certain sort of identification. Also, in the Spirit's book, we will understand that the spirits, they aggregate themselves because of their affinity. Their affinity of ideas and their affinity of tendencies. Think about a soccer team. They get together because they like, they know, they get together and they play. Members of a specific profession get together because of the affinity of their ideas, their tendencies, their qualities, so that they get together, and together they act upon the subject that they are studying and dedicating themselves to. In that sense, we all link ourselves because of the affinity of our tendencies, because of the quality of our emotions. There is a popular say, misery likes company, right? That is very true relating to obsession. When we are sad, chances are we see sadness around. Is it because around there is sadness? Well, there is sadness, happiness, anger, fear, good, bad, everywhere. But through our identification, because of our own feelings, we start seeing around in the same vibration, in the same quality that we are vibrating, or our own quality as well. Therefore, there is no victim and perpetrator. That is an opportunity, and that is another one taking advantage of that opportunity. We know that the communications among the spirits, in a general way, it is called mediumship. All of us, in a way, are mediums, because all of us, in a way, have the ability to communicate with the spiritual world and to receive the influence of the spirits. So I would say that one of the first definitions that I take from obsession is, it is a spiritual disease. It is a spiritual imperfection. It is a result of a spiritual imperfection. And as such, needs to be dealt with and combated and healed by developing spiritual remedy, spiritual medication. Allan Kardec will classify, to help us understand obsession, or the intensity and severity of that influence, in three main categories. He would say that the first category is called simple obsession. When malevolent spirits impose themselves upon us, and I would say mediums here, because some of those examples Allan Kardec is taking from the ability of the spirits to communicate with each other through the mediumship. But I will expand that to all of us, for all of us are mediums. So when a malevolent spirit imposes themselves to a medium, interfering against their will in the communications they receive, in the thoughts that we have, it impedes from the communicating from them or from us to communicating with other spirits and substitute themselves for those who we evoke. So the simple obsession would be the tenacity of a certain spirit to influence themselves upon us, upon our thoughts, upon our ideas. But when we say that is simple, it is because that idea will happen in the level of thought that is still possible for us to identify and to combat. Usually we ask ourselves if there is any influence from the spiritual world on us, because we wake up well and then without apparent reason we start feeling ill, we start feeling sad, we start feeling angry. And the spirits would say that many times it is an influence from the spiritual world or from the spiritual environment or from a specific spirit that will inflict this feeling on us because we already had that tendency to feel it. Because it will be latent on us to feel sadness or to feel anger. And the spirits will understand and will take advantage of this tendency for us to have this feeling and influence us. Their desire usually is to cause us some sort of trouble. Their desire is usually the idea that it would disturb our day. We will influence in our relationships. Everything is going well, and then somebody looks to the other direction, we start feeling annoyed by it without apparent reason. And there is the opportunity for a spiritual influence that will then disturb our marriage, disturb our relationship with those who we want, disturb our ability to focus when we are working, and they will feel good about it. They will feel good seeing our little misery happening. We will understand a little bit why the causes, but hold off. Because sometimes we can start thinking with ourselves, why do they want to do anything bad to us? I'm not a bad person, right? I think none of us here are necessarily bad people. So then why we may have an obsessor trying to inflict pain in our lives, trying to inflict disturbance in our relationships? Let's keep that question. The second category would be the fascination. The fascination is a little more complex because sometimes we are feeling well, start feeling angry or annoyed or sad for no apparent reason, and then we start questioning ourselves, right? Is that mine? Is that one mine? I was well and now I'm not. So then we do have the conscience that this is happening with us. We see the contrast, right? We see the contradiction. In the category of obsession that is called a fascination, this doesn't happen. Sometimes, especially when we are assaulted by certain thoughts or ideas of feelings that are very bizarre, but we still believe that they are good. When we start having very absurd ideas about things, and we believe in them, and we defend them, even though everybody else around us doesn't. When the influence of a spirit makes us believe that the absurd is actually reasonable, then we have a case of obsession that is called the fascination. There are cases in mediumship, for instance, that a spirit will present to a medium saying that they are certain deceased celebrity or important figure or a discarnate author that wants to write through their hands. And by the quality of that reading, everybody around, everybody in that mediumistic meeting, everybody in the group of people that are working with that specific medium would say, this doesn't sound right. This spirit, when they were incarnated, they were so well versed, they were so intelligent, they wrote in such a polite way, and the quality of that writing right now is not as good as the one of the incarnate spirit when they were incarnated. So something doesn't sound right, but the medium will not accept the criticism, will not accept the counsel, the advice of others that say, hey, maybe this spirit is not who they're saying they are. But no, we would say, no, it is. I am sure. I am receiving a communication from someone important. I am good enough to receive that. Maybe because you are envious of me, because you're jealous of me that I'm communicating, with that such a spirit. You may be jealous of me, so then I am right. So here we are talking about a medium that is starting to take that malevolent influence very seriously, as if it is the truth. This can cause lots of problems, because if I am a medium, for instance, or if I am a person that is trying to connect myself with good influences, with better spirits, with my mentors or my guides, but every single influence that I'm receiving, it is a malevolent, it is a malicious influence, and I am believing in it. Chances are that I am conveying something very negative that is going through me, and I am not aware of it, and I am blind to that influence. So that is a case of fascination. Allan Kardec would say that this has to do with a blind influence that prevents us from realizing the deception and comprehending the absurdity of that influence, even when it jumps out at the eyes of everybody else. Now we have the third case, which is more severe, more not as common, but very, very serious, which is called the subjugation. In the past, or in old readings on Spiritism, we would hear the word possession. Allan Kardec would say the word possession is not correct just because one spirit cannot possess another person's body, for instance. Otherwise, we would discarnate. This body is mine during this incarnation. It is because the influence is such that even has power and control over motor centers on our nervous system. Therefore, a spirit is able to control some of our movements, some of our speech, some of our actions. Therefore, showing that this specific link is very negative, very powerful, and difficult to break. Allan Kardec would say that it is a constriction that causes its victim's will to become paralyzed, making them act in spite of themselves. There are some examples in the literature, especially if you go in the series of André Luiz, in the life in the spiritual world, we see certain cases when, because of certain influences, the spirits are even not able to control where they go. They are not able to control how they speak and what they speak. They find themselves under what Allan Kardec would say a true bondage. Subjugation can be either mental or physical. In the former, in the mental influence, in the mental subjugation, those who are subjugated are led to make frequently absurd and compromising decisions, which under a kind of delusion they regard as sane. It is a type of fascination, but much more severe. And in the physical subjugation, the spirit acts upon the physical organs to produce involuntary movements. In a nutshell, that would be the obsession. So then at least we understand now a little bit from the Spiritist literature, from the answers that Allan Kardec researched and compiled through the communication with the spirits, and then he brought this understanding for us. But there are a few characteristics that Allan Kardec would say that are present in every single obsession. First of all, it is the spirit's insistence in communicating, whether or not the medium desires or not. Or in this case, for us, it is the insistence that certain thoughts that the spirits afflict and impose on us, even though we may not think and we may not desire to think about them, or feelings that we don't desire to feel. And in certain cases, even through writing, if it is an ostensive medium, audition, and even through typology, through noises. And its opposition to all the odd spirits that try to do so, which means communicating with us. That is an illusion, and that illusion is such that in spite of the intelligence of the medium, it prevents us from recognizing the falsehood of the ideas and the ridiculousness, as Allan Kardec would say, of the communications received. It is the belief, a blind belief, that every time that we receive the identity of a spirit, we don't question. We think that every time that a spirit gives their name to tell us who they are, we will believe it. The medium's acceptance of praise from the spirits who communicate through his or her intermediation. And if we're thinking about causes, that is a good glimpse for us. If we are believing in something that somebody tells us just because they are praising us, this is hitting in a very important point in us. That is our pride. That is the desire to feel recognized and superior. That is a propensity of avoiding those who could provide enlightenment on us about that situation. Somebody suffering from obsession, chances are, especially in the beginning, they will refuse advice from anybody that would say, hey, you don't look well. Hey, recently you are feeling some things, you are saying some things, you are acting in a way that is not like you. And the first reaction, if we are obsidiated, we're going to say, no, that is just you thinking about it. I am okay. Maybe you are not. That's why you're thinking about it. That is an offense taken as a criticism. That is sometimes that is physical coercion. Continuous disturbances around the medium, either caused by the medium themselves or their target. So we see that obsession, it is a kind of relationship that is negative, that is harmful, that is an intention to create disturbance in us by one specific spirit that somehow desires to see something happening with us that would lead us to feel bad, to feel embarrassed, to feel disturbed, to feel sad, and to destroy some of our relationships and to cause something very negative. Now, what would cause the obsession? Some would say, well, an obsession is caused because there are evil spirits, right? If there were not evil spirits, probably there would be no obsession. If there were not spirits with the desire to cause us harm, obsession would not exist. I am sorry, but that's not the case. Because Allan Kardec, in many different parts of the literature that he brought to us, he would say that the moral imperfections of those who are obsessed, the moral imperfections of those who are suffering that influence, is frequently the obstacle for their liberation. In the Genesis, he is very, very clear and says obsession is always the result of a moral imperfection that allows entry by evil spirits. So, obsession exists because we are imperfect. The obsession exists because by our imperfections we have breaches in our spiritual strength. Therefore, we are propense to feel and to act and to think in a negative, in a hurtful, in a harmful way. Therefore, other spirits that are identified with this feeling or identified with us will then take advantage and use those flaws and those imperfections that we have to exert influence upon us. Therefore, if we do a soul search and we discover that we are usually short-tempered, chances are that we will face many situations, many occasions, and many opportunities where we will tend to use that short temper. Therefore, if there is any spiritual influence, it will then provoke our temper in order for us to explode on other people. If we have the tendency for sadness and for depression, chances are that the spiritual influence will then try to potentialize that feeling of sadness and depression, leading us to potentially a chronic illness. And then we will need to receive complex attention in order to deal with a situation that if before it was a tendency, it became a chronic disease. And we can go everywhere with that. The reading that Joyce brought to us exactly says about it. So many of the disturbances and diseases that we have, they are caused by our feelings, our thoughts, our tendencies, and our attitudes that then become a breach for us to lead the way for other spirits to take advantage of those tendencies, and many times potentializing them, turning a tendency into a reality that it is very, very difficult for us to get rid of after. Why would God, in its all goodness, in its all justice, in its all mercy, will allow this to happen? I thought about that before. How many times something bad happens with us? How many times something happens that is not under our control, that makes us suffer? And then we question. But instead of questioning ourselves, we question God. And we ask ourselves, why? If God is good, why does God allow evil to happen? Well, of course, that Allan Kardec was smart enough to make that question to the spirits, and the spirits were very benevolent to give us that answer and say, first of all, imperfect spirits are meant as an instrument. Remember, not intentionally. God doesn't allow evil to happen voluntarily. God doesn't provoke evil. But because of our breaches, God allows this to happen to test our faith. to test our constancy in order to practice the good that we haven't practiced yet. God allows us to go through the consequences of our imperfections. God doesn't allow us to be influenced by evil, but allows us to suffer and to receive the natural consequences of our own imperfections. So then we are going to recognize those imperfections. We are going to be the ones working on them. And we are going to be the ones taking the merit for working on them. Therefore, acquiring the necessary strength to immunize ourselves against those negative tendencies. God's laws are perfect and immutable. Here, God allows us to receive the consequence of our free will. That is the law of cause and effect, the law of action and reaction. In the book Heaven and Hell, Allan Kardec is very clear in saying that all of us being imperfect, we will suffer. The intensity of our pain is in consequence of our imperfections. Therefore, every time that we combat one of those imperfections, we will reap the benefits of it. And that's how we grow. When we are exposed to those trials, to those experiences, in order to find the means to strengthen ourselves. Therefore, if we realize that we have angry tendencies, we need to work on our anger. We need to understand the source of our anger. We need to develop strategies. We need to develop coping mechanisms to deal with the anger when the anger comes to us. Therefore, controlling that anger, because all of us have the potential to feel anger. But when we let the anger turn into aggression, then we have a problem. When we turn the anger into an agent of change because of things that we don't like, then we are starting to work towards using that anger with benefit for us and potentially benefit for others. Not letting that negative influence affect us. But every time that we have the tendency to turn anger into aggression, chances are that the spirits will use exactly that in us, giving us every single opportunity to be aggressive. When evil influence an act on you, it is yourself who calls them out of your desire to do evil. That's what Allan Kardec tells us. Little evolved spirits come to help you to do the evil when you have the will to commit it. Allan Kardec in that regard is very emphatic. Today, of course, that we can interpret those words, but basically what Allan Kardec is saying is we are the ones responsible for an obsession to take place in our lives. He says as well, however, they cannot help you in evil except when you actually desire to indulge in it. Therefore, if we don't desire to commit that act, if we don't desire to give rope to our anger and turn into aggression and violence, the spirits will not have a place to influence us, because it will have no use for them. That relationship is not going to be beneficial for an obsessor spirit. Now, if we think about the causes, in the Gospel according to Spiritism, in the chapter called Blessed are the Afflicted, Allan Kardec would say there are basically two causes of the suffering that we have in our lives. Let's include here the obsession. One cause is in the present life. One cause is in previous ones. If we don't find reason today, and many times we don't, why we are suffering the influence of spirits that desire us to fail during this incarnation, chances are that in previous existences, that relationship either was beneficial for us, or we had exactly the same tendencies and acted upon those same tendencies with those spirits that today became our obsessors, or they are looking for revenge because sometimes we were the obsessors once before and they were the victims. And today they are looking to pay back what, because of our even more imperfect stage in previous incarnations, we provoked something negative in them. When we say that today is the best incarnation that we can have, this is very true. Probably some of the acts that we committed in the past are the ones that allow us to suffer today because of the consequence of those acts that we committed and because of the breach that we opened in order for those spirits that somehow were connected with us in the past have an influence on us, trying to make us suffer. What is the difference today? Today, we have the means. Today, we have the opportunity to look at ourselves. Today, we have the opportunity to look at our imperfections. Never in the history of humanity we had so many resources in order to look at ourselves from the physical point of view, in looking for physical health, in looking for combating diseases. We never had so much help in terms of social, psychological services, opportunities to get to know ourselves, and spiritual help in order to understand our nature as spirits, our relationships that we create from centuries and centuries ago in previous existences, the importance of the link between the material and the spiritual world, and the means in order to stop those negative relationships to inflict pain on us and also on others. Therefore, we have the resources today in order to understand and to fight the causes and the results of obsessions. Now, finally, what can we do then about the obsession? What can we do in order to combat those influences? And here is a crucial point. So far we are talking a lot about ourselves. So far we are trying to understand about ourselves, about our tendencies, and about how we strengthen ourselves. However, Allan Kardec, also following the directives of Jesus himself, when Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for those who hurt you, do good for those who try to inflict you evil. In the Medium's book, Allan Kardec asks, can we also combat the influence of evil spirits by guiding them morally? And the spirits are very clear in saying, yes, and that's exactly what you should do, because it is often a duty that is being given you. Now, quickly, let's think about that. It is a duty. Do we have a duty to then change an obsessor? In fact, yes. If we just spoke about those relationships probably have a source in the past, probably if we also contributed for those negative relationships, if by any chance we contributed for the vengeful spirit of an entity today, of the vengeful tendencies of somebody, then we have a duty to help them to eliminate those tendencies from themselves as well. You should be charitable. You should be devoted to it. You should take consideration in understanding how to change somebody's tendencies. Because if we are doing this with ourselves, chances are the spirits that are influencing us are also seeing that. By means of your good counsels, you may lead them to repentance and hasten their advancement. This can be applied to every single spirit. And specifically when we think about obsession, that is even more important. If we are stopping the evil tendencies in ourselves, why not then help to stop the negative tendencies in the spirit that somehow it is trying to influence us negatively? Because if I am just doing well, thank you very much, and I am gone, but still the result of that imperfection from other spirits may start influencing others as well, we are co-responsible for that. So, Allan Kardec, also in many different places in his literature, will tell us, above all, practice the virtues that God recommends to all according to their situation. This is from the Medium's book. In the book of Genesis, Allan Kardec describes precisely some of the most important mechanisms in order to combat an obsession. That's what we call disobsession. Allan Kardec would say, first of all, it is necessary to expel the evil fluid or the negative mental influences with the aid of a better one. If we are speaking about the moral, and our moral influence is what causes our moral imperfections, that's what causes the obsession. We need then to strengthen our morality, our tendency then to do good, in order to have moral authority. Allan Kardec will continue saying that it is also necessary to act upon the intelligent being, the spirit, with whom one must have the right to speak with authority, and such authority is not given except by moral ascendancy. The greater the ascendancy, the greater the authority. Which kind of ascendancy we are talking about? If we are talking about something bad, to combat that, we need to talk about something good. We need to talk about combating hatred with love, with forgiveness. We combat the ill temper with a peaceful one. We combat the harsh words with the silence. We combat the sadness with joy. Every time that we face those negative tendencies, we are only able to help to combat them when we ourselves are able to understand the sources of them in ourselves, transform ourselves, and be able to influence others. And in order to assure deliverance, Allan Kardec would say, it is necessary to lead the perverse spirit, or the obsessor, to renounce its evil designs. And here, that is the greatest difference from potentially other doctrines that would try to simply expel something negative from us or from our presence. But we are here with the responsibility to help to transform the evil tendencies of our spirit in good ones. We help to turn back a spirit that is an obsessor, revengeful, negative, comprised in doing something bad, into somebody that will also think about themselves, the cause of their own afflictions that led them to become vengeful, therefore repenting and changing their ways in order to also start doing good again. Because none of us were created to do evil, but all of us were created to do good. Allan Kardec would say, it is necessary to awaken the spirit in repentance and the desire to do good, together with the aid of skillful guided instructors through particular evocations, in this case in mediumistic meetings, speaking with those spirits, aimed at its moral education. We combat obsession with the moral education. With the education of the sentiment, with the education of the intelligence, with the education of the spirit. One can then have the sweet satisfaction of having freed an incarnate and having converted an imperfect spirit. The task becomes easier when the obsessed understands their situation and bring their concourse of their will and their prayer. And finally, Allan Kardec would say as well, in all cases of obsession, prayer is the most important help in acting against an obsessor spirit. Pray for those who persecute you. That's how Jesus said. As a few conclusions that we can take from this brief understanding of obsession, its causes, and its remedy, we can take that obsession is a relationship between spirits. The cause of obsession is always a moral imperfection of those who are suffering the obsession. We can only combat negative tendencies and influence with good ones. We must act with love, with faith and actions, with humbleness, and develop our moral authority in order to be able to do so. Because first of all, we need to look at ourselves. We need to know ourselves in order to change ourselves. Therefore, having the ability to understand that changing is important, beneficial, and is a duty for us as spirits. Therefore, finding the desire as well to help change others, to go back and do good that they haven't done before, or they stopped doing, in the same way that we look to ourselves in order to recover our ability to do good that one day we stopped. And today, especially in this incarnation, we're trying to do again. And like always, I like to leave a lesson from the model of moral authority that anyone can have. So then if you had any question, which kind of a moral authority that I can use, which kind of a moral authority model that I can use in order to start practicing, first of all with myself, and then who knows, one day may be able to influence others positively as well. Question 625 of the Spirit's book. Jesus. When Jesus says, watch, therefore, know your tendencies. Analyze yourself. Pay attention on your ability, on your tendencies, of your imperfections, of your breaches. And pray. And connect with those spirits that really are helping us through this incarnation in order to combat our evil tendencies, therefore combating the potential of those obsessive influences. Watch and pray, so then you may not enter into temptation, which is then that finally that desire to act upon our tendencies that we have, right? Thank you very much. Have a good Sunday.
All right, everyone. So we have Thank you, Tiago. Great lecture. We have time for questions now. If you guys have any questions here. Anyone? Any comments? I know we have a question from the internet. Yep. Mm-hmm.
She's asking, can a mother be obsessed by her own moral imperfections throughout a whole incarnation and blame others for her own sadness, which can lead to explosion, aggressiveness, in brief, completely changed in behavior of other family members, obsessing especially husband and daughter?
Yeah. So just quickly repeat the question. So can a mother, or anyone in that matter in a family, can be affected, or in that word, obsessed by own moral imperfections and then blame others for that and then create chaos in family, basically, right? So, yeah.
How to prevent that?
Yeah, and how to prevent that.
Right. So I will start with the second part. The question is how to prevent that. And then if you go to the question 919 in the Spirit's book, that it says, know thyself. We can only fight a tendency if we know that we have it. We can never change anything if we don't know that we have that. So we cannot combat our anger if we don't believe that we are angry. We cannot combat our sadness if we don't realize, understand, and accept that we are sad. That is the number one. So then in order to be able to combat our negative and imperfect tendencies, we need to make sure that we are allowing ourselves to understand that negative side that we many times don't like seeing. That is a hard work, because in many ways we don't like seeing what is not good in us. We tend to show and to see and to present ourselves with what is good, but every single time that we don't make that effort to look to ourselves, it turns into something that I call a blind spot in our own lives. The blind spot is that place that we can't see. Because I don't see, I don't control. Because I don't control, I am controlled by. Therefore, in order to combat that negative influence, I need to start accepting the words of somebody. Look for professional help if I need in order to combat those tendencies. We don't need to do this alone. As I mentioned before, if we have a physical illness, we go to a doctor in order to look for it. If we have emotional illness, there are mental health professionals that today can help. We are fighting stigma in the 21st century to understand that mental health is health. Therefore, mental health is the closest that we can get of the spiritual health that we're talking about. And in this case, I think it is probably a topic for another lecture, but auto-obsession or self-obsession is also something very complex. But what we can say is, if we are speaking about obsession as the influence that one spirit causes in another, we can also talk about an incarnate spirit influencing another incarnate one. Therefore, we can call that there is an obsession happening because we can call that there is a negative kind of relationship affecting, for instance, from one member of the family to another. Therefore, the entire family can benefit from looking at the quality of those relationships, practicing the respect, the tolerance, the forgiveness, because in family, that's when we have the opportunity to mend the negative effects of relationships that we are carrying for many centuries. If we had a certain quality of relationship in the past, we come in the same family in order to receive the consequences, to understand that it was not good what happened before, and in order to transform it. There is a great opportunity to look at the health of the family, to look at the mental health of the family, and to promote ways in understanding, in forgiving, in having the practicing the tolerance and the forgiveness, and also to find the ways, if we are able to do so, to make the changes that are necessary. But at the end of the day, if I don't want to change, I won't.
Yeah. And just to highlight one thing that Tiago said that's very important, I know we're here talking about spiritual obsession, but if you think about the process and how it works, so each one of us, if we're stuck in a cycle of ideas which are negative in general and can draw from the negative energies, and you just go into that spinning cycle that you can't really get out of it, you are in a way putting your mind, or your spirit in that case, right, in such a state that it's almost like it's an obsession, right? So it's an obsessive idea. It's such a thing that you cannot get out of it, you're influenced by it, and all your behavior is generally affected by it, right? So we can get ourselves into this mode, and we actually do it quite often, right? It's not the same thing as we're talking about here, spiritual obsession, way that someone is like projecting thoughts on you or anything like that. It's like we can get stuck in certain ideas that will lead you to a state of mind which is not good, right? Which is negative, which will delay your progress, which will impede your ability to socialize, will cause you to go into modes of aggressiveness, as the question goes in. Can we go into that? Oh, of course we do. Aggressiveness is nothing more than you showing the world that you're not good with yourself, right? And one of the channels to put that frustration through sometimes is through some explosive behaviors, right? Self-regulation is very important for everyone, kids, right, to adults, to spirits. Right, so this is a very complex topic, but it's very important for us to understand that we are our thoughts. So really, do you want to know who you are? Look at what you're thinking, not who you think you are, right? But really, what's right here, right? Yeah, you have a question? Yes.
Excuse me. My name is Tom. Congratulations, Tiago. Beautiful, inspiring presentation. I have a question for both of you.
Yes.
You talking about negative thought and deal yourself with your own negative thought.
Yes.
First question. Where are the origin of this negative thought inside of you? Second question. Do you have any practical exercise, real exercise, linguistic exercise to deal really, not just get rid of your negative thought? It's easy to say that.
Yes.
I've been trying for my 18 years old to try to get rid of those negative thoughts. It's not easy. I just find some ways, but I would like to hear about from you. If you have any suggestion how really we can neutralize this negative thought and change our belief system.
Right.
So just repeat the question. Maybe someone didn't hear on the internet. So the question is like, what are the practical ways, like what we do to actually get rid of those negative thoughts or turn it around, right? And what is the source of them, right? So
right. Again, if we and thank you for your questions. I think they are very, very important, because it is true that this is difficult. Every time that we read something, especially when we are reading the Spiritism, Allan Kardec was always very clear that the Spiritism should evolve together with the advancements of the world. If science is evolving, if the methods of helping are evolving, we need to make sure that we follow that. The source of all our thoughts is in our spirit. Number one. Our spirit, we don't know how old we are. Today we are 80, 40, 50. But we don't know how old we are. We don't know how many incarnations we have been through. We don't know, because we don't remember, how many relationships we have had before. Therefore, the source of our thoughts is in our core. It is in our spirit. It is not. We cannot blame our physical body. We cannot necessarily blame our brains for that. But it is in the source of our thought. The source of our thoughts is our intelligent principle. Therefore, it justifies to say that it's a difficult task to change a negative thought, because many times we are in this loop that Marco was talking about, probably for many, many, many incarnations. Right? If we look in the Spiritism, the answer is relatively clear, and it might sound like an easy fix to say, you replace a negative one with a positive one, right? The psychologists today would say, we are all made of light and shadow. We are very complex beings that interact with each other based on what is good about us and what is also not very good. If we don't befriend our shadows, that is one specific psychologist called Carl Jung that would say, if we don't befriend our shadows, we will never leave the shadows. One of the hardest things for us to do in our lives is in recognizing that we have very negative, many times perverse thoughts, tendencies. It is a very difficult thing, and that's why I say we don't need to do it alone, because in fact not only the Spiritism can give opportunity for us to deal with that, but the psychological world today provides help for persons to understand how negative those thoughts are, to the point that they can cause physical diseases in us. The source of our thoughts is our spirit. If we congregate negative thoughts, there is a whole range of negative influences around. Our electromagnetic field will then congregate very dense matter from the spiritual world, impregnating our bodies to the point to cause us physical illness.
Where's my mom?
Right? It is a long-term task that we know by experience, by knowing by the literature, that some of those tasks may take more than one incarnation. But in persisting in combating those negative thoughts, number one, recognizing them, and second, even if we start from outside in, that helps us to then start to practice from inside out. We need to start changing, for instance, the quality of our language, the quality of what we do, the quality of the readings that we have, the quality of the things that we watch on TV, the quality of the relationships that we have, the quality of our actions. If I have a tendency to certain addiction, for instance, I need to make sure that I'm asking for help and I'm fighting against those tendencies, because I know that if I have access to certain things, I will tend to become addicted to them. So it is a very difficult process, but it's a process that it is very important because it takes time, it takes a lot of effort, and I don't know if you want also to add something on it.
So one thing practical, right? So, and we got many examples of that in Spiritism, is the easiest way for you to disperse those energies is actually to do something quite positive. So the easiest way to do that, help someone.
Sorry, come again?
Right, so you help someone. Let's say, I'll give you an example of Chico, is a classic example, right? So when his neighbor killed his dog, right? So the dog was, ill, and she thought she was doing a great thing about, she saw that, maybe he's taking too much of his time taking care of this ill dog, and, she went there and actually got rid of the dog, right? So he was very sad, right? And he was obviously upset. So that's the type of cycle we go through sometimes, right? So the overall negativity of our thoughts is like going against someone that did something against us that we don't like, right? And what Emmanuel suggested to him, just find the thing that she wants the most, his neighbor that just killed his dog, right? Find the thing that she wants the most and give it to her. And he did. So he worked very hard for, he didn't make a lot of money in his work, but he eventually found that she wanted a sewing machine, and then she bought one for her. He worked for that. So the happiness that he generated on her reflected directly back at him and cleared away pretty much all the negative thoughts he had generated because of the death of his dog. Now, what can we do practically it's much simpler than that. We don't need to find our most villainous enemy and trying to figure out what they want. That's not practical. But just for everything positive that you do towards someone, you're certainly going to wipe out a multitude of your own mistakes. Right? So, how do we do that? Right? So that's the question. So, the math in Spiritism is a little bit more complicated. So, if let's say if you do something really not cool, right? Even by thought or by action, okay? Let's say you have like a -1 on your scale of positivity, okay? So if you do one thing good, it's not good either because you're back to 0, right? So you have to do twice now. You have to do 2 times more, 10 times more, 70 times 7 more, right? So you can start to break the cycle that you have in your mind, because every time you do something positive, it's not only the positive action that matters, but the whole, like what Tiago was saying, the universe will be projecting help for you to cope with your own actions. So the easiest way to deal with your own frustrations is making someone happy. And this is charity in practice, right? How do you do that? I don't know. There's a million things you can do. Like each one of us had every single day opportunities to do that. Thank God for that, right? Like every second, like you walk in the street, there's always a chance for you to be a better person by helping someone. And it doesn't matter who, how, when, it doesn't matter. How big, how small. Buying a coffee is good sometimes. No, buying a car, I don't know. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't matter what you do. Saying hi is a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Right,
And,
just projecting good thoughts on someone,
and
right?
I just want to add quickly, and sorry that we are beyond the time, but the instruction that was very clearly given by the spirits, given by Jesus himself, when Allan Kardec compiles the entire understanding that is the Spiritism for us, we underestimate the power of prayer as well. The prayer is the most powerful link that we can have with the highest source of goodness that we can have as well. We are never alone. We are always surrounded by spirits. Every time that we pray, we establish a positive connection with the spirits that are around us, that desire our advancement, that desire to help us to find the means that we can start looking at what we want to change, whatever it is, will probably help us to understand that there is probably an institution beside our, in our neighborhood that we can, for whatever reason, volunteer at, and that will help us to put in motion one of the most important ways to communicate. It is the communication that we have with our own Creator. Is the communication that we have with God, because we will then mobilize the areas in our spirit that are the most sublime ones, and then we will start in that process of transcending our natural bodily and material tendencies. We will reconnect progressively with the spiritual life, therefore starting to strengthen our spiritual core, therefore feeling more and more capable and willing to do something positive. The prayer is very powerful, because then it will mobilize all that spiritual environment that will conspire for our benefit. Right?
Perfect. So we're running out of time now, but we'll be happy to answer more questions after. Okay. So thank you, Tiago, for the lecture, and we're gonna thank you. So we're going to get ready for the passes now. As you know, passes is a transfusion of good energy.